we left off last time talking about the age of the earth. And that's what we're going to talk about for the next few sessions, actually. How old is the earth? It is a key component in, I think, in the creation-evolution controversy. The testimony of Jesus in Matthew 19:4 was that the creation of Adam was the beginning. Now, you'll find many scoffers today will say, well, the ancient people talked about the earth being 6,000 years old because they didn't know any better. What are they trying to imply by stuff like that? We're smart, they're dumb, right? Had a question-answer session at the church I was at a couple nights ago. Where was I? Wisconsin. This one, we had people lined up at the microphone to ask questions. And this one scoffer was there. His professor was sitting out in the crowd, sending the student up to ask questions. And I would be sweet and kind, but I'd just, blow the student out of the water, as my answers. And he'd go back, and the professor would put his arm around him, and, you should have said this. Well, professor, why don't you get up here, you coward? If you got something to say, come ask me a question. But see, that way he can maintain his composure by sending the students out to be sacrificed and not have to do it himself. But the students kept making statements like, well, the average person in this room probably doesn't understand what the complexities of science. I said, hold it. Folks, let me translate that for you. What he's saying is, he's smart, you're dumb. He said, that's not what I meant. I said, how many of you took it like that? Nearly every hand went up. It's exactly what they mean. And when Jesus said the creation of Adam was the beginning, a common response you will get, people will say, well, the ancient people were just trying to explain the world to a bunch of ignorant shepherds. They phrase it slightly differently, but it all boils down to the same thing. We're smart, everybody else is dumb. In other words, if you don't believe like us, if you don't believe evolution, you're not smart. And that attitude reeks off of some of these guys. I mean, you got to really watch for that. So Jesus said pretty clearly the creation of Adam was the beginning. Here the textbooks are teaching the earth is literally billions and billions of years old. And they'll say the universe is older than that. All through the books you see the phrase, millions of years ago, billions of years ago. I mean, the books are full of this in this county. I mean, in the Bible Belt. Every place I go, they claim to be the buckle on the Bible Belt. I've always wondered where it really is, But, we've even got some Christians going around teaching the earth is billions of years old. Hugh Ross has a large ministry called Reasons to Believe. He is one of the key leaders today of the movement among Christians saying the earth is billions of years old. And I don't know if I got all of his books, got quite a few of his books. I toured his ministry a few weeks ago when I was out in Southern California. He teaches the earth is billions and billions of years old, and God had to have billions of years in order to get us here. Well, the God that I worship, number one, He doesn't need billions of years to do anything. He can do it in no time at all. Secondly, He certainly doesn't need to practice. He can do it right first time. He doesn't need to throw some material out there and let's see what happens to it. He doesn't need billions of years to prepare anything for anything else. He just, poof, creates it. So, the earth is not billions of years old. Now, who cares about this topic anyway? Let me tell you the importance of this. I think it's extremely important. The credibility of Jesus is certainly at stake. The credibility of the book of Genesis is certainly at stake. Genesis teaches very clearly, if you add up the dates, that the earth is about 6,000 years old. And Jesus quoted from Genesis 25 times. Apparently, He believed in it. If you want to get a fascinating chart, and there's too many pages to make a bunch of copies of for tonight, but in the back of the Defender's Bible by Henry Morris is a chart showing all of the New Testament references and Old Testament references that refer back to Genesis. There are 200 New Testament references referring back to the book of Genesis. It's very neat to read all these passages in here if you want to get this chart at page 1550 something here in the Defender's Bible. But 1556. Nearly every other book in the Bible refers back to Genesis. I think there's maybe 2 exceptions that do not refer to Genesis. So this topic, I think, of the age of the earth is, and Satan knows this, of course, this is the way to undercut the entire Bible. You destroy the credibility in Genesis, and you might as well throw the rest of the Bible away. And the scoffers certainly know this too. Now, a fourth reason, the evolutionists care about this topic, because if the earth is not billions of years old, the whole theory of evolution looks awful silly. Doesn't it? I mean, think about it. If I say, if you kiss this frog, it'll turn into a prince. That's obviously a fairy tale, right? But if I tell you the frog can turn into the prince slowly, somehow the human brain can accept that. And that's precisely what evolution is teaching. The frog turned to the prince, but it happens slowly. It's still a fairy tale. But see, the evolutionists will fight tooth and claw over this issue about the age of the earth, because this is the first hurdle they have to overcome. In order for evolution to be true, zillions of things have to be true also, and this is the first obstacle they face. How old is the earth? I was asked to go speak at this church in Iowa one time, and a lady came to the meeting and she said, "Brother Hovind, my husband's an atheist. Would you please talk to him?" I said, "I'll be glad to." I went over to the house the next day, sat on the couch, and he sat on the chair, and we talked for 2 hours. All we talked about was the age of the earth. Didn't get to talk about the Bible, just talked about how old is this earth anyway. The guy was an engineer of some type, I forget now, very smart man. After 2 hours of what I'm about to share with you, information that proves the earth is not billions of years old, after 2 hours he looked at me and said, "Wait a minute, you know, the earth is only a few thousand years old, you're right." But he said, "That means it had to be created, doesn't it?" I said, "Yes, sir, and that's really what I came to talk to you about." But it took me 2 hours to get there. Of course it had to be created. But see, sometimes you have to go through lay the groundwork before you can reach them with the gospel. And I think the age of the earth is a critical place to start. Tonight we're going to begin with some scientific ways to show the age of the earth. I think it's pretty obvious from Scripture the earth is about 6,000 years old. But what about science? What does the world itself teach us about its age? There are several ways you can approach this, and I try to give people evidence from space, evidence from physical things on earth, and evidence from living things on earth. Kind of the three categories I put my evidences into. I start off with one that everybody can understand, that is the population of the earth. This article, July '99, says, "Last weekend, the world's population topped 6 billion. Now, 6 billion is a lot of people. You'll find, if you look back in the 1999 newspapers, you'll find about 8 or 9 different dates where they claim this happened. You know, nobody knows for sure when the earth got 6 billion people, obviously. National Geographic said it happened in October. This one says July. It doesn't matter. The fact is there's probably about 6 billion people on the planet. In 1985, there were 5 billion people on the planet. I went to the University of West Florida and got several books. I forget the name of the one, Population, Encyclopedia of Population, I think was the name of it, at the University of West Florida. But any good library will have books about population. That's what they deal with. How many people are here? How fast is the population growing? It's all statistics from different countries around the world. And everybody agrees that somewhere in 1985, the world crossed over the 5 billion mark in population. Back in 1800, there was only 1 billion people on the planet. Now think about that. The population has increased 6 times in the last 200 years. If we continue that rate for 200 more years, 600% increase will be a lot of people. The price of property will go way up, right? Now, especially when you stop and consider, only 3% of the Earth's surface is livable. 70% is underwater, for one thing. A whole bunch of it's under ice or desert. I mean, Sahara Desert is huge, much larger than America. Fly out west and you'll see how much property just is wasted real estate, basically. You couldn't live there. 3% of the population, 3% of the planet is considered to be livable for humans. If before the flood came and it was destroyed, if the pre-flood world was, say, 80% livable, plus you've got much better atmospheric conditions, which we'll get into later when we get into what's on my video number 2 about the Garden of Eden. If you have much more plant life growing and higher oxygen concentration, you can get a more dense population with plenty of food. The earth was truly built to be inhabited, like the Bible says. I think it's in the book of Psalms. God created it to be inhabited. It could have held a population of hundreds of billions. No problem. This is a huge place. But this Merrill Earth Science textbook, 93 edition, shows the kids that there was about 1 billion in 1810. People argue about when it happened, but roughly around the turn of that century, we crossed over the 1 billion mark. Now they're saying the earth is overcrowded. Here's National Geographic, October '99, and it says on October 12th, the 6 billionth person is going to be born. Like I said, you know, go back to '99, you'll find a lot of arguments of when this happened. But somewhere in '99, we probably crossed over the 6 billion mark. Now, this issue of the population of the earth was a great motivator for Charles Darwin. I want to pass out this sheet to you here. Everybody take one of these and pass it on down. This is a copy of some of the pages from Henry Morris's book, The Long War Against God. If you want some great supplemental reading, Did we ever order this one to add to our catalog? We should, Dan. This is awesome. You can get it through our ministry. I read this years ago when I just was getting into the creation movement, and this book had a very profound influence on me. He lays out the history of evolutionary thought. Now, I feel like he kind of went backwards. He starts with the present. You know, who's teaching evolution now? More. Okay. He starts with the present and kind of goes backwards in time. So, right.
Over there.
Question above the flood.
According to the graph, it would look to be about 1 billion at the time of the flood.
Yeah. Nobody has a clue how many people were here.
Nobody has any idea.
All you can think of is they're having much larger families. If you have infinite food supply, no reason to limit the family, and living for 900 years, there's no reason to not have 100 kids per family. Some of the women are thinking, oh, brother, think of all them diapers. What did you say? Now you know why there was more than one wife? I don't know about all that. I had 3. It didn't hurt a thing. I don't know what the population was. I just made up a number. It could have been, some people honestly think there may have been lots more than we have today. Maybe 10 or 20 billion. I don't know. I don't think there's any possible way to tell. You know, you pick a number, because any number you pick is going to be based on several assumptions, so we don't know. The world is certainly not overcrowded, though. Thomas Malthus wrote a book called The Essay on the Principle of Population. In that book, and he talks about it on this paper I passed out, and you can read this later when you go home, just add that to your repertoire of interesting reading. But Malthus said the population grows geometrically, like it'll double every so many years. And the food supply grows arithmetically. It only grows by adding. You add, you know, a certain percentage or a certain number to the food supply. Now, he's wrong, okay? Malthus was dead wrong. Because if you get more people on the planet, you now have more people available to plant the food. So it's wrong to say the food supply grows in a linear progression and the population grows geometrically. That's simply not true. But Malthus said that in his book. His book was written in the late 1700s, I believe, or early 1800s. Had a very profound influence on Darwin. Because Darwin read that and thought, wow, if there's more people born than can possibly survive, then it's really best if the weaker die off and the stronger survive. And you get a person with this kind of mentality. Well, look on the second page of this sheet I passed out here. On side 2 here. Herbert Spencer also wrote prolifically on this topic, saying, look, it's really best if the strongest survive and the weaker die off. I got a line underlined for you. Spencer said, if they are not sufficiently competent to live, they die, and it is best they should die. He's the one who coined the phrase, survival of the fittest. Now, there's an interesting movie, I'm sure all of you have seen it, where this phrase comes up. He said, are there no poorhouses? If they're going to die, let them die and decrease the surplus population. He was talking about Tiny Tim. Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge, right. Charles Dickens' book, The Christmas Carol. When you understand, that book was written during this time frame of the late 1800s when people had this mentality. Many of the laissez-faire capitalists said, hey, well, if they can't survive, it's their own problem. And we finally had to get lots of labor laws, child labor laws and stuff had to come in because they were working little bitty kids in the factories, you know. He gets his arm cut off, oh well, get another kid. That really was the mentality because there's too many people anyway. That's a little bit of the mentality they have in China right now. People are expendable. Just throw them away and get another one. You know, there's plenty of them out there. Somebody said if you lined all the Chinese up in a column, 4 people wide, 4 abreast, and started marching them into the sea at a steady march, you would never run out of Chinese. They're being produced faster than that. That's just the Chinese, not the rest of the world. Column 4, I don't know if that's true or who figured that out, but I suspect that probably is. They're being born awfully quick, you know. The laissez-faire capitalists, or we can go off on a long rabbit trail there, but you might want to read this, get this book, Henry Morris's Long War Against God, if you want more on this topic of how the evolution philosophy relied on the idea that there are more people born on the planet than can possibly survive. Now, this is exact opposite of what God told Adam to do. God said, Adam, I want you to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Have lots of kids. Of course, the devil wants the opposite of that. And I'll show you in a minute why he wants the opposite of that. Malthus wrote his book on the Essay of Population. Let's make that a quiz question, Heidi. Who was one of the people that influenced Darwin's thinking? We'll have several before this course is over. Thomas Malthus would be the answer. He influenced Darwin's thinking. Darwin thought, because of Malthus's book, there are too many people, and therefore you come into this guy Spencer, who coined the phrase survival of the fittest, which we'll get into later, which, by the way, is not true. Now, the world is not overcrowded. A little bit of facts can undo a lot of erroneous teaching. Jacksonville, Florida, is the largest city, land-wise, in America. What they did in Jacksonville has about 800,000 people. They incorporated the entire county into the city limits because they had two governments, a city government and a county government. Well, why pay for sheriffs and police, you know, why have two separate systems of government? So I'm sure somebody got upset when they lost their job, but they ended up incorporating the entire county limits into the city limits. So when you drive into, I forget the name of the county now, it's not Dade County. Anybody? What? Duval County, yeah. When you drive into the county, you're also in the city. So it's 25 billion square feet in Jacksonville, Florida. Now that's a huge city. If you've ever driven across it, it's a huge city. But 6 billion people on the planet could all get in there and everybody have 4 square feet. A little crowded, not as crowded as an elevator gets. But you could probably fit everybody in Jacksonville, Florida twice quite easily. So the world is not overcrowded. I tell people, have you driven across Kansas? Or Wyoming or Montana, where Eric went to school out there? Look, the world's not overcrowded, folks. I just flew out west, and Eric, you flew back. You look out the window and you think, where is everybody? I mean, there's zillions of miles of nothing. There's just nothing down there, folks. The world is definitely not overcrowded. I tell them, if it's overcrowded where you are, move. There's loads of room out there, okay? Remember we were up in South Dakota at the Seth, and what's their last name? Union Center. We stayed at their house several times. Anyway, Rodden. Okay, Rodden. He was talking about buying the property across the street. Remember that? He said, I'm thinking about buying that property across the street. I said, oh yeah? How much is it? He said, well, I think he said it's 1,000 acres. He wanted to add this lot to his farm. He said, but the guy wants $50 an acre. That's kind of high. $50 an acre. It's hard for us to comprehend that, you know. I was in Hawaii, and it's $500 a square foot to buy property. It's just all a matter of where you are, you know. I was in near downtown Los Angeles talking to the pastor there, and they were talking about buying property to expand their church, and he said it cost them about $1 million an acre to buy property. Just a matter of where you are, okay? They need to buy some of that South Dakota property and move it to Los Angeles. That would solve the problem. But the world is not overcrowded. Anyway, the population growth chart clearly shows that it could have easily started 4,400 years ago. I want you to look at go back to the one that's in the textbook here from Merrill's Science. I want you to see what they did with their population growth curve right there. Oh, hang on. They get to the year 1100, which would be the time the Vikings are running around. They chop it off, and it tapers down. Now they're saying in 7000 BC, there were just very few people on the planet, right? And then it kind of drifts back off 500,000 years. Well, this is all imagination. They think that a very small population of a few thousand or a few score thousand people were on the planet for 400,000 or 500,000 years. Wouldn't you have an inbreeding problem in a hurry? You know, you have to marry your first cousin for 10 generations in a row till people start being pretty dumb after a while. Talk about redneck jokes. I mean, they'd have a bunch of them, wouldn't they? This is just pure fantasy. The fact is very simple. The population growth curve tells us man has not been here for billions of years. 4,400 is plenty to account for all the people on the planet. Now, there are several different ways this can be arrived at. Some people use a factor and say there's 2.4 children per family, which I think is the world average or something like that. You can get this number, and it varies greatly from source to source, but you start with 8 people and pick a generation time of 40 years. It's probably actually less than that, but be real generous. Give them a 40-year generation time or something, which means by the time you're 40, you've had your 2.4 kids. Nearly everybody has them way before that. Just about any way you multiply it, you're going to get a population of 5 or 6 billion in just a few thousand years. If it weren't for wars and famines and pestilence and stuff like that, it would be much greater. During the Great Plague in England or Europe in the 1300s, about a third of the entire population died. It's all because they were not obeying God's law about sanitary disposal. We got a whole videotape on the Bible and health. You might want to get on that. About the verse in Deuteronomy, you know, when thou goest abroad to do thine easement, thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and turn back and cover that which cometh from thee. In other words, carry a shovel when you go outside to go to the bathroom and bury it. Okay? Of course, in America, we don't have many problems with this because we have, you know, very strict sanitary laws. But in other countries, they have serious problems with diseases because of the lack of sanitation. And in the 1300s, people died by the millions because of the lousy sanitation. They had open sewers running through the street. You don't flush the toilet, you dump the bucket into the sewer, and then hopefully it flows downhill to somebody downstream. Yeah. Like the cowboy humor they saw, don't drink downstream from the herd, you know. And don't squat with your spurs on and all that kind of stuff. But it was just simply a disobedience to God's word that caused that. But even though nearly a third of the population died in just a few years span, the population caught right back up. Just in a short time, it jumped right back up where it was before and surpassed it. Well, for one reason, the infrastructure is already in place. If you've already got houses built, nobody living in them, you can now afford to have more kids and bigger families and easier living conditions. And fields have already been plowed and cleared, you know, so it's much easier to take over new territory or take over territory for farming. So it didn't affect the population much, surprisingly. You know, probably within 100 years, it was the blip in the scale was totally forgotten. At the time of Jesus Christ, most experts agree there were about 250 million people on the planet. 250 million. This chart will be in your seminar notebook here that you got with the course, showing this population statistics. Now, you'll find people that argue about the exact number, and there is no way to tell the exact number. There were several kings and leaders who took a census of their population. Why was Jesus born in Bethlehem? They had to go to Bethlehem for the census, right? So it was a common thing to count your people even back then. And people have done research on this and say probably about 250 million, which is 250 million people at the time of Jesus Christ. Now, if man had really been here for 3 million years, the population would have grown to where we would have about 150,000 people a square inch. And I have some skeptics, believe it or not, that write me letters and get mad at me and say, oh, it would not, it would only be 120,000 per square inch. Well, you numbskull, you're missing the point, okay? The fact is, of course, that would depend on what you're using for a multiplier, you know, how many kids per family, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact is, the world simply is not overcrowded, and it is not billions of years old. The population growth curve demonstrates that. Now, whether we like to understand it or believe it or not, there are an awful lot of folks in our country and around the world that have the evolution philosophy. Now, if evolution is true, then only the strongest have a right to survive. And it really would be best to eliminate the weakest. Now, this is the exact type of stuff Hitler told his people. The strongest should survive. It's really best to get rid of the weaker ones. And obviously, we Germans are the strongest, so therefore we should kill everybody else. That was the mentality that motivated Hitler and Pol Pot and Joseph Stalin and, you know, pick your evil leader through history. Many of them had this philosophy that there are too many people and we need to get rid of the weak ones. The New World Order, and there are many of our American leaders are involved in a drive toward a one-world government. It's probably led by the elite group called the Council of 300. And we'll get into much more of that later when we get in video number 5, the very politically incorrect one. A few years away at the rate we're going, yes. But if you want to watch video 5, we cover that about the Council of 300. These are the top 300 super smart, super rich people on the planet. They sit around and have their meetings and decide which country needs to have a war to thin down the population, or who's not cooperating with, you know, paying back their loans to us. It's all goes back to money. The love of money is the root of all evil. And we're going to be amazed when we get to heaven and see what really has happened on this planet and see how money tied into just every evil thing that's happened. I can go off on a lot of rabbit trails there. But they would like to reduce the population to 500 million. What happened? Back in Genesis, this is really the first prophecy. Put that down as a quiz question, Heidi. The first prophecy of the Messiah is in Genesis chapter 3. After the devil, you know, tricked Eve, Now technically, some people say it wasn't the devil, it was the serpent. It doesn't say it was the devil in this verse. I believe there are some New Testament passages that cross-reference back to that indicate it was indeed the devil in the serpent. But it doesn't say it in this passage, okay? The serpent, which was Satan, said to Eve, or the Lord said to the serpent, "Because thou hast done this thing," that is, tricked Eve, "thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life." Now let me stop right here. Some people are saying certain large snakes, like boas, I believe, and anacondas maybe, have bones in their abdomen where their hips should be, and this proves they used to walk on land. There was a big deal in the newspaper this week about them finding some fossil of a snake with legs. Several large creatures that do not walk, like a whale and these large snakes, do have bones in that region, but they're nothing to do with walking on land. Those bones are anchor points that different muscles attach to. And without those bones and those muscles, they cannot reproduce. It has nothing to do with walking and having legs. It has to do with making more baby snakes or whales or whatever the case may be. The body is so huge, they have to have the extra muscles and assistance there. So when he said you shall crawl on your belly, I don't know that we can find a scientific justification for this. And I don't know that we could prove the snake used to have legs and lost them other than from the Scripture. Maybe if somebody finds something, I'd like to read it. But I would have to take this just as simply miraculous. The Lord said, you know, you're going to crawl on your belly and eat dust the rest of your life. But the next part of the verse is the first prophecy, Genesis 3:15, the first prophecy of the Messiah. The Lord said, "I will put enmity," arguments, fights, disagreements, hatred, "between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." Now, a bruise on the heel is painful. You ever bruise your heel? Step on a stone? Man, it hurts for days, doesn't it? But it's not fatal. Seldom is a bruise on the heel fatal. Satan knows full well some seed of the woman is going to bruise his head. So he knows from this prophecy 6,000 years ago, the Lord said, someday a man's going to be born to a woman that's going to be your undoing. And so because he's scared stiff of what God's going to do to him, he's decided to try to frustrate the plans of God by killing or corrupting every human being alive. When we get to the days of Noah, he had just about everybody corrupted, didn't he? A few hundred years later, in the days of the Tower of Babel, just about got them all again. There have been many times down through history where just about everybody was corrupt. Satan's working awful hard, and I think most of his effort is because of this prophecy. He doesn't know who's going to bruise his head. Remember when Herod wanted to kill baby Jesus in Bethlehem? What did he do? He slew all the children. Just killed everybody, 2 years old and under, right? Now, there's a fascinating book, if you want to read something amazing on this story, called the Archcove volume. Has anybody ever heard of that? The Archcove. Have you read any of that, Dan?
Read parts of it.
Oh, it's awesome. What happened, this guy back in 1820 or something, some guy in Germany decided, hey, if Jesus was such an important figure, surely there were other records about him besides the Bible. So he began researching all sorts of ancient records and found court documents. For instance, Herod got in trouble for killing all the children in Bethlehem. He was called into question. What gives you the authority to kill all these kids anyway, you know? And it was quite a big deal in that country over what Herod did. Now, it's not recorded in the Bible, but it is recorded in other books, and this guy found it and put it into this little book called the Archcove volume. Very fascinating reading. When they went to interview the high priest, sent some people to interview the shepherds after the annunciation of Jesus is going to be born, you know. And the shepherds described what they saw in there, of the music rolling up and down the hills, and they were so filled with joy, they didn't know if they should cry or shout, so they did both at the same time, you know. Just amazing reading about that kind of stuff. Well, they sent some people to interview Jesus when he was 26 years old. And the guy came back and said, I think Jesus is avoiding me. Every place I go, they say, well, he was here, but he left. It's like he knows when I'm coming. So they interviewed Joseph and Mary instead. And they describe what Joseph and Mary were like. They say Mary was short and plump and a very pleasant woman. Joseph was big and ugly and dumb, basically. And Joseph was disappointed in Jesus because he expected him to be a king, and he thought, I'm going to get rich off this deal, you know. And it turned out Jesus had no intention of being a king, and Joseph was very disappointed in him. It's neat just to read this from a secular perspective if you want to get more on that. But anyway, Herod slew all the children in Bethlehem. Many people have the evolution philosophy as the foundation for their thinking, And it does this just like it did for Charles Darwin. The thinking is, we're nothing but animals, and if there's too many people, we need to get rid of some. All over the country, they have laws on how many deer you can shoot, right? Why do they have limits? Somebody's full-time job is trying to figure out how many deer are in the woods and how many can the woods support, how many trees are there, how much grass is there, how much food to eat, and if we need to eliminate 20% of the herd this year, and therefore they issue permits to kill X number of bucks or does. They're trying to maintain the population in ratio with the food supply, which is not necessarily good or bad, it's just the way it is. But a lot of folks would like to eliminate people. Jacques Cousteau was an evolutionist. Go back and watch any of Jacques Cousteau's movies or books, things that he did, and you'll see evolution all through there. He was a strong believer in this philosophy. He said, in order to stabilize world population, we must eliminate 350,000 people a day. That's at the United Nations Development Fund for Women. We want to develop the world, and we've got to eliminate 350,000 people every day in order to save the planet. Have you seen those bumper stickers, save Mother Earth? The Earth is not your mother, okay? But that's this mentality. Charles Worcester said when they were arguing about banning DDT as a pesticide, now there's no question DDT is harmful. I think that's the one that thins the eagle's eggs and the bird sits on them and they crack and therefore the baby dies. But one of the arguments in favor of banning DDT was people are the cause of all the problems. We have too many of them. We need to get rid of some of them. And this ban of DDT is as good a way as any. Because if we don't use DDT, there'll be more pests, more mosquitoes, and more people will die. That's one of the thinking, one of the parts of the philosophy behind the arguments for banning DDT. This quote says, "The world has cancer and the cancer is man." You'll find a lot of people, if you read articles in the newspaper or watch TV carefully, the mentality is that there are too many people, we need to get rid of some of them. The weaker should be killed off. Ted Turner, president of CNN, Communist News Network, I tell everybody. He said a total world population of 250 to 300 million people, a 95% decline would be ideal. Okay, Ted, you first. Everybody thinks somebody else ought to have to die, right? So we can have more room. Every group thinks, of course, they're the superior one. Hitler thought it was the Germans. The Japanese thought it was the Japanese that are superior. They really thought they are the superior race and it's their duty to rule the world. So we need to go kill everybody. They don't think that now, at least I hope they don't, but they did at a time. There's a lot of interesting articles going around about Jane Fonda becoming a Christian now. Now, she's often referred to as Hanoi Jane. You need to understand why. If you write me or remind me, I can email you the letter that I have of some of the prisoners who were in Vietnam that when Jane Fonda came over, she was demonstrating against the war. Her dad, Henry Fonda, the movie star, and Jane Fonda is a movie star too, she had, she had gone to North Vietnam to tour the prison camps. The prisoners heard, wow, an American's coming. We've got to get word to our family that we're still alive. So a whole bunch of these prisoners lined up to shake Jane Fonda's hand. They wrote their social security number on a little strip of paper. And when they shook hands, they handed it to her. She smiled, took the paper, walked down the line. This wad of paper is getting bigger and bigger in her hand. When she got to the end, she didn't even look at it. She went over to the commandant of the camp and said, "Commandant, these men are trying to get a message out. You may want to deal with this." So after she left, every one of those men got a beating. 4 men died from the beating. Were killed for trying to get let their loved ones know I'm still alive. So she has been referred to as Hanoi Jane. Now, if she got saved, great. God can forgive anybody. And God can use her in a great way in His kingdom. What she did was wrong, and I hope she, if she's a Christian now, I'm sure she realizes that. But we've all got things we've done wrong too. But that's why she's referred to as Hanoi Jane, just so you know, since one of the purposes of this class is so Eric knows why I say everything I say, right? Okay. Prince Philip of the World Wildlife Fund said, "If I could be reincarnated, I would wish to return to Earth as a killer virus to lower human population levels."